Yo, what's up, guys? I just saw this sort of interesting, as in rage-inducing comment on Reddit. So I decided it's 8:30 on Friday. I was supposed to go out and hang out with my friends. It's my one night that I actually get to myself during the summer. Why not enjoy myself? But I'm like burnt out. I'm so tired. I told my friends all no. I decided to just stay in, watch some movies, and then I finished watching the movie Oppenheimer. I finished watching the movie Oppenheimer. Then I decided to doom scroll Reddit, and here's what I found. I found this kind of interesting topic: poor teaching methods in Lang. Lang is one of the most popular classes to take, which is why the 54% pass rate makes sense. The more people there are, the more people that fail, since it's so common. At my school, it's third year English, so many people fail. That makes sense. I agree. Here, let me actually zoom in to make it easier for you to read as well. All right, let's keep going. Then over here, however, I don't think any teacher is very good at teaching it. Now, this is obviously an extremely strong claim to make. I would disagree. From what I've ascertained on Reddit, TikTok, and my peers this past week, the scores are also the result not just of the numbers of people approaching it, but also the lack of objective teaching methods and lack of good teachers. I was lucky to get a 5. As of now, I am one of the only ones in my school with about 200 people taking it to get a 5. I don't understand, why is AP Lang so hard? Where's the disconnect? I think it's a valid question. I think it's an interesting question, and I think it is actually probably one of the questions that really drives, gives me motivation for all the things that I'm doing. Okay, I'll give you my take on it afterwards, but let me just quickly respond to some of this nonsense that I'm hearing here. Okay, so let's start over here. As a teacher, I'll say that it's hard to teach because it's extremely amorphous. Okay, so this is pushing back against the idea that there's no objective teaching method here. Okay, let's continue. Yes, it is the study of rhetoric, but that's broad. Okay, I agree with this sentence. It is very broad. We have zero insight into what will be on the exam. I agree with this as well. You don't know, well, not zero, but close to zero. Will the prompt provide a purpose? Will they have to determine it? Okay, will it be okay? Sure, whatever. I do think there's probably some boundaries around this, but I will let the AP teacher have this point because I haven't actually taught an AP Lang student in a while. We're preparing you for so many things. Okay. I mean, I'll just work with that. I'll work with that. We can never be sure we're helpful. It's frustrating. Minimal resources. Yes, agree. Ultimately, this is a course focused on skills. Skills. Okay. Strongly agree. And despite what College Board seems to think, applying those skills to different tasks is not easy, nor is it how any college course works. No. Okay. I have things to say about this, but I'm gonna come. I'm gonna. I'm gonna get back to this later. All right. So that is one teacher's reaction, um, and let me move on to the other thing that I want to read here. I forgot about this comment. Let me just quickly read this comment. The problem with English subjects is that it's very difficult subject. Sure, it requires a lot of time. Sure, dedication. Sure, because they're inherently good at it. No, they're not inherently good at it. Although there is some, I do believe there is some IQ factor that a general intelligence factor that kind of comes into it. But it's not just inherent. There's actual skills to develop, or they've had a very good teacher in the past. Okay, yeah, I sympathize with the differential outcomes of previous education and having a bunch of kids in your AP class that are at very different levels. I understand that that's a very hard challenge for teachers to overcome, especially teachers at public schools or even at private schools to some extent. It's harder to learn commit as you get older, as time becomes an issue. Um, AP Lang doesn't typically require that much work. What? Okay, I don't know what this is even talking about, this last bit, but this for me I thought was not a particularly useful comment. Now here's the one that actually inspired me to make a quick video for this. Teacher here. There's a lot here, but the short answer would be no. Students are not failing because there's a nationwide overflow of bad teachers. Okay, yeah, I agree with that. Ultimately, English is a very subjective subject. No, no, not the English. Not the English that the College Board is interested in. That part is not subjective. It is not an objective subject. No. It is objective. It is objective. There are objectively correct claims and objectively falsifiable claims. Okay, there are things that are just wrong, okay, in English, and we are looking for this. And no matter what rubric they use to try to make it more objective, it never will be. Depends on how much of a claim, how strong of a claim you're making with this one. I can agree with the soft version of this claim. Okay, I do think it will never be as objective as math. There's always there's always wiggle room with English. It is also 100% skill and not content. You can have a skilled reader-writer come in and score a 5. There we go. There are very little actual English terms on the test. There we go. Okay, I agree with this part. So this is the part that I actually didn't read before starting this stream, but this part is a very important. It's a very important concession that this teacher is making here. The number one thing is this: without the maturity to think deeply about the subject, you aren't going to do great on the test. Okay, thinking deeply about the subject is actually literally what you're teaching. It's actually the skill that that teachers should be teaching. Now, thinking deeply is very broad, super broad. And so obviously if a teacher believes that their job is to make you think deeper, make kid think deep, if that is the job, then that teacher's obviously going to get very frustrated with that job because it's a very difficult job. You can't just make students think deep, okay? But there are skills in reading and writing. They work together. There are skills in reading and writing that basically are equivalent to or functionally equivalent to thinking deeply, okay? And I'll even motivate myself to come up with some examples so I can work through some examples with at the end of the stream. Actually, maybe not. I'm a little tired, but here we go. Unfortunately, there's limited things your teacher can do for 1 year, and I agree with that. This kind of calls back to the whole thing with like students who are like the differential outcomes, right? Students don't all come to the course at the same levels, and I have a lot of sympathy for teachers of classes at schools where schools are not pre-filtered. School classes are not pre-filtered by ability. They're pre-filtered for age, which is like very unrelated to ability. Not very vanishingly unrelated to ability, okay? It's just you can be at very different levels at the same age. So I understand it's extremely difficult for a teacher to teach in that kind of context. So I respect teachers for doing that, for basically managing any kind of outcome in that kind of context. Here we go. Some students simply aren't skilled and mature enough yet. This isn't a test. Okay, that's true. I actually just was talking about that. Remember, this isn't a test to determine if you're ready for college. This is a test whether you're a skilled enough reader-writer to be able to skip some college classes. So this is just arguing about the statistical claim at the very beginning, but it's not even really what OP was really talking about, so I'm going to skip that part. Here we go. Here's an example to consider. I had many students that were straight A students in other classes because they could memorize formulas, dates, facts, etc. That's a little reductive. I don't think these straight A students in other classes are just memorizers. I think that's not giving the other subjects enough credit. However, it was a great source of frustration when they were barely pulling C's on my essays because they weren't particularly well written. Sure, they can memorize sentence starters or formats to follow, and I could give them all sorts of guided questions, but the ability to think deeply about a subject, consider all sides of it, and express it in a nuanced, convincing way is complete and utter brain power, guys. Where does that brain power come from? Is it just in hate? I just said in hate. Maybe it's because I'm full of hate right now. Is it just innate? Is it just inherent to you? Is it just some magical goo goo juice that you drink, and only certain rich kids get to drink this, and everybody else doesn't get to drink this. Where does this come from? This brain power comes from developing power in your brain. And how do you develop power in your brain? You actually work on the skills, the cognitive skills that increase that brain power. And how do you do that? I'm kind of repeating myself right now, but I'm trying to say you do it by reading and writing. Okay, now reading and writing are not the only cognitive skills. There are other cognitive skills. Okay, but reading and writing is a massive part. Verbal skill, verbal intelligence, verbal. There's a word for this. I forget the word, but the verbal component of our intelligence is a extremely big component of our intelligence, just to start with. But also, it's extremely moldable. You can actually build it. You know. You can build it. You can build it literally. Think about a time in your life. Okay? From maybe 1 year back, maybe 3 years back, maybe 6 years back. A time in your life when you finally realized that you sound smarter when you say when you add qualifiers to your statement. Like, you used to talk like, burgers are the best food ever. But then, later on, you qualified it to say something like, burgers are the best when you're feeling hungry and you want all nutrients. I just made that up. I'm sorry. Sorry. But you've learned to qualify these huge, sweeping, absolute statements, and you've actually learned to put conditions on them or limiters on them, okay, so that they're only certain, that you're making a truth claim under certain conditions, right? You've learned to do this, most of you, if you are watching my video anyway, right? You've learned to make qualifications on your claims, and you probably learned it. Maybe some of you learned it actually. For you guys, probably most of you learned it sort of intuitively, naturally, just through communication with your friends, with your teachers, through your essays, through your writings, through your Reddit comments, through whatever's, right? You've learned over time, sort of intuitively, just through trial and error. But you know what? There are some kids who've just never learned it. And you know what? A teacher has a job there. The job is to teach the student to qualify their claims. If the student has no motivation whatsoever, if the student is just so far behind all the other students in their class that the teacher simply does not have the time to specialize or custom fit a lecture for that one student out of 30 that they're teaching, or 40 sometimes that they're teaching, right? I understand why it's hard to implement that goal, why it's hard to follow through on that goal. I understand that, but that doesn't change the goal. The goal is to teach the student who doesn't have the habit of qualifying their claims to qualify their claims. And this is an objective feature of the English language. When you are doing an AP language test, when you're reading a passage and doing rhetorical analysis, it is incumbent upon you to figure out which parts of the passages that you're reading are qualifications. Because it really changes your understanding of that passage when you know that this part is just a qualification, so it's not really the main idea, right? You really need to know that kind of stuff, and that is objectively true when you make a claim that this is a qualification. Okay, it's not some fuzzy-wuzzy, wishy-washy thing that just English is just a subjective nonsense. No, a qualification is an actual move that writers take, okay? And it's your job as a student of AP Lang to identify those qualifications. Qualification is just one example. There are more examples. The ability to think deeply about a subject. I'm going to reread this little bit here in front of me. The ability to think deeply about a subject, consider all sides of it, express it in a nuanced, convincing way. Guys, go back to a time when you were less think deeply. When you think deeply less. Think about 1 year ago, 3 years ago, 6 years ago, okay, when you used to say things like, No, you're just wrong. Okay? And then 1 year ago, 3 years ago, 6 years ago, you actually learned. Actually, you are more persuasive when you don't just straight out say, no, you're just wrong. You started saying instead, ah, you're trying, my friend, you clearly care a lot about this topic with this claim or whatever, but I think you're missing an important fact. I think you're not incorporating an important piece of evidence, right? Think about a time in your life when that change happened in your in your writing, in your speech. Again, if you're watching my videos, I'm going to guess probably 50% of you, maybe more, 60% of you have had a moment like that in the past when you actually transition to speaking like that. You know what you're doing now? Now you're addressing counterclaims in the sort of college board parlance. They like the word counterclaims, but it's actually just sort of acknowledging the intent of your interlocutor, of the person that you're speaking with, right? Acknowledging the intent, or even acknowledging agreements, making concessions to the person that you're speaking with. When you do that, your argument becomes more effective. Many of you have already learned this just sort of intuitively. Many of you just learned it just by just getting downvoted to oblivion on Reddit or whatever, because you used to speak in a certain very aggressive way, and then you realize that actually it's more effective when you do it the other way around, right? Maybe you learned it just with your parents. I don't know, but you learned it intuitively just through trial and error. You know what? A lot of students haven't. A lot of students haven't. And in that situation, I'm going to say it one more time, the teacher has a job. The teacher's job, the AP language teacher has a very specific job. The job is to teach the student to make concessions, to address counterclaims, even further, to go ahead and sort of reflect or sort of acknowledge the intentions of the opposing party. Why? Because it makes you a better writer, a better debater, a better thinker. It deepens your thought when you can do that thing. Okay? You become a deeper thinker. What's the use? Your brain power, the complete and utter brain power, that complete and utter brain power comes, like you level up. You level up from level 7 to level 8 when you can do that, when you can address counterclaims, when you can make concessions. You actually level up by doing that. Your brain power literally goes up when you do that. Okay? So the teacher does not get to say, "Oh, not everyone is developed enough." No, man, it's the job of the teacher. Well, it's not the job of the teacher, by the way. Important qualification here. It's not the job of the teacher to create motivation out of thin air. The teacher can provide the materials for these students to learn qualifications, to learn concessions, to learn acknowledgments of intention and whatnot. The teacher can provide all the materials, and that's the job of the teacher to provide those materials. It's not the job of the teacher to generate motivation out of thin air. The actual learning happens when the student is motivated and the teacher provides the materials together, right? It's sort of it's a partnership. So I'm not trying to say that the outcomes are totally dependent on the teacher, but going back to my point, you cannot just say they're not developed enough in their thinking. You must, as a teacher, provide the tools for them to develop that part of their thinking. Okay? That's the job. There is no get by free pass for kids not knowing how to do these things. And when these kids learn how to make their concessions, learn how to acknowledge the opposing party's intentions or whatever's, right? These kids will then be able to look at a passage on the AP Lang test, and they'll be able to identify it as well. They'll be able to see, like, oh, that is a concession. I see that concession. I see the transition from the concession to the main claim. I'm more likely to get a 5 on the AP Lang now because I can break down this passage objectively and analytically. I can break it down and I can explain this passage when I write about it, right? This is an objective feature of the English language. This italicized bit, of course, I agree. I agree that developing everyone, 100% of your students, especially if you're teaching like 40 students, right? And out of those 40 students, the top five are like leagues better than like the bottom, like the bottom five, right? When there's a huge differential between variance between the top and the bottom of the class, right? You can't develop everyone into a reader, uh, into a student that gets AP Lang 5. You certainly can't. Um, you certainly can't generate the motivation for them to all be there, okay? But you can provide the tools as a teacher. And this is a straw man argument. No one is arguing that 100% of students should get fives due to, and the fact that they're not getting their fives is because of is only because of the teachers. However, if anything, this is a little comment about AP Lit. I'm not going to go into AP Lit. If anything, this teacher actually furthers the OP's point. Okay, OP is saying the scores are also the result of the lack of objective teaching methods. And when I see two teachers on Reddit say something like English is subjective, brain power is just there. When I see teachers just say that, they're actually, what I'm seeing is that the teachers are feeding into Hot Gazelle 9071's narrative. They're actually, these teachers are reinforcing that narrative. And they should be doing the opposite. Okay? I just gave you two examples of things that come out on the AP Lang that are just things. You learn them. They're objective. They are objective. They're objective. And you can learn them. You just have to teach it. Or if the teacher's not going to teach it, you just got to learn it on your own, I guess, because none of your teachers apparently think that there are objective skills to learn. Frustrating. So let me wrap up this rant really quickly. Please, if you are a teacher, I respect the difficulty of the job, okay? Because I'm not in the same position as you guys. I'm not teaching school classrooms of like 20, 30, 40 kids of different of a widespread of ability levels and skill expressions, okay? That's not me. I sometimes do teach big classes like that, but the huge difference is my clients, because I'm in the private sector. I'm working with generally very motivated kids, and I have the luxury to sort of like target like skill levels, and I know that's not the case in your classrooms. I respect the work that you do, and I strongly believe in public education. I have a lot of thoughts about this, about how it's kind of going into the shitter right now, not just in America and other places as well. But like, I really believe in public education, and I respect that project. That said, we gotta root this out. We cannot rely on this lazy, hand wavy excuse that like English is subjective. The features of English, starting with grammar, are extremely patternable. Okay, extremely patternable. When I see a sentence, and as a sentence says something like, despite wanting the contrary, comma, Saul fell into the Wikipedia rabbit hole. Okay? Versus Saul falling into the Wikipedia rabbit hole, comma, Saul remembered that he didn't want to do so, period. The general content of both of these sentences that I just made up, okay, the despite sentences and falling into sentence, these two sentences, even though they kind of say the same thing, it's grammatically true that they emphasize different things. Because what is the independent clause? It's objectively true that when I say, despite wanting the contrary, Saul fell into the Wikipedia rabbit hole, I'm really focusing a lot more on Saul falling into the rabbit hole. Whereas if I say something like falling into the Wikipedia rabbit hole, Saul remembered he didn't want to do so. This is really focusing on Saul's desire not to be in the rabbit hole, right? Right? We can agree on this, right? This is objectively true, right? Because that's how the grammar of English works, right? If you agree to this, teacher, then you can certainly agree that qualifications are real, okay? That concessions are real. That claims and reasons and evidence, they're real. They have real structural relationships. That sentences sequence a certain way, do certain things, and those are claims that we can make. And sometimes sentences are written poorly so that it becomes open-ended, or sometimes sentences are written unclearly so it becomes a little ambiguous. But generally speaking, we can make true claims about sentences or paragraphs or whatever's, right? If we agree on this, then we cannot. If you and I agree on this, then you and I cannot rely on on this lazy excuse that English is just subjective. And now for students, having heard all of this, please do not fall into the trap that English is subjective. I want you to actually dig your heels in and believe that English makes sense the way that it's constructed. That centuries of kind of writers sort of writing and kind of developing the conventions of writing, right, has actually led to something that more or less makes sense and that we can actually have sustained dialogue about. That it's stable enough, this convention of language is stable enough that we can actually write full-on essays about it, okay? I want you to believe that it is robust, that it is systematic, that it makes sense, that it's objective. And with that trust, that the objectivity of this system is going to reward you, I urge you to go headfirst and dive deep into the English language. And I promise you, you will be rewarded for it. Your English, your language, your reading will become better. All right. That's the rant. Rant over. Saul out. Until next time, keep on learning, keep on growing. Bye.